Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Transformer Insights webinar sponsored by Security, software-defined networks for IoT, moving connectivity from commodity to differentiator. I do apologize. I'm Matt Hatton. I will be your host for today's session. So we at Transformer Insights do a tremendous amount of work looking at the impact of IoT and things to do with networks, particularly mobile networks, and we have the opportunity today to talk about how those two things intersect. It's a fascinating topic at the moment, and one that's really generating a huge amount of interest, particularly in the context of a number of developments happening in IoT at the moment. Big one being price pressure. Another being the virtualization of various network elements, and the third one being the complexity of deployments involved in IoT, and all of those things kind of intersect and create an interesting dynamic for how we think about how networks are able to support IoT, and indeed how to make use of those capabilities to differentiate an offering, which is one of the significant concerns or considerations of anyone supporting IoT connectivity. Format for today's webinar is that we will, well, it's effectively a panel. We have 4 thought leaders in the world of IoT. They're going to be sharing their perspectives. I will be putting some questions to them. We have a set of structured topics for consideration, so we'll work our way through those, and about halfway through, 2/3 of the way through, I will jump onto the questions that we have received from the audience. We got a series of those already, so thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance, and we look forward to getting questions as we go through. There was also a competition from Security to win a bottle of gin for the best question that we received. So I will allow them to make that call on which one was the best question, and whoever is the winner there will be able to enjoy a bottle of gin during the Christmas season. But without any further ado, I should introduce, or rather allow, my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. So in the order that I can see you, Mike, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Security.
Matt, thank you very much for that. Yeah, so I'm Mike Bromwich, CEO and one of the founders of Security. So we built a software-defined mobile network for IoT and enterprise applications. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Excellent, thank you. And Nasia.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. My name is Nasia Skulkariti. I am the founder of Apiro Data, a platform and services IoT company. I'm also the CDO for GTC and the director of IoT for Mobile Ecosystem Forum. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Welcome, Nasia. Next, Graham.
Hi, everybody. My name's Graham Hartide. I'm VP of Sales with Velos. Velos are a service IoT connectivity provider based in the UK.
Excellent. Thank you. And Mick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mick Lemberg. I'm Chief Product Officer of OneIoT. And OneIoT is a global IoT connectivity service provider where we bundle together different network operators and simplify achieving a global connectivity for IoT device manufacturers or service providers.
Fantastic. Thank you for your intros there. Okay, kicking us off, Mike, I think I should be diplomatic to start with you as the sponsor of our webinar, and on a topic which I know is close to your heart, and I think one that's really particularly a good starting point for discussions today, which is the network challenges today of delivering IoT, particularly thinking around challenges of supporting a global market with local requirements, breakouts, compliance, that kind of thing, issues of consistency across multiple networks. What are the problems with networks and how they deliver global connectivity today?
I think that the starting point for that is that IoT is a very broad term. Whether you agree with the term or not, it covers so many different aspects and use cases, and all those use cases have very varying requirements. Security, performance, geographic aspects, regulatory perspectives, and so trying to build those on top of what has traditionally been a network about providing service, one size fits all, isn't ideal. The mobile networks of the world are becoming a bit of the sort of fabric of society in so many ways now, and as a result, they're becoming more critical, and so the connectivity has to be tailored, use case by use case, and that's been quite tricky in the way that IoT has been delivered over the last decade, and we sort of believe that has to change.
Okay, and change how?
Well, lots of the control, the way the network's configured, the way the routing is configured, is normally buried deep within the depths behind a mobile operator, in darkened rooms with very skilled engineers. As a result, things take time, things cost money. There's not really a level of agility that allows customers, innovators and developers to tailor and sort of muster the mobile network to meet their needs. So, very simple things about the path that data takes, around the world, and what traffic is and isn't allowed, and what performance requirements are. We believe that needs to be democratized and put in the hands of the actual customer, so they can build out the connectivity that they need, rather than have to fit in with a bit of a sort of consumer-based service, or as a second-class consumer for that service.
Excellent. Okay, and other panelists, thoughts on what Mike suggested? Are these challenges that resonate with you in your experience in IoT?
Well, if I may jump in there, Matt, what Mike is spot on. The challenges when delivering IoT globally are quite multifaceted, and we need to consider, what is happening around connectivity and provide local flexibility on top from all the regulatory compliances that we have to abide every single time we cross the boundaries from one country to the other. It's not as simple as just plugging a SIM and shipping something from one destination to the other. It's quite complex and it's quite involved, and it requires consistency, not only abiding in those regulatory regulations, but also a consistency on the quality across the entire service and across the entire ecosystem, and support for that matter.
That's good. And Mick, Graham, you're both nodding away. I guess that also resonates with you. I mean, we have this issue of regulatory. That's kind of a binary thing. But what Nastia and indeed Mike were talking about is more about quality of service, the consistency of service. How do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. A lot of the networks that were built absolutely for the consumer, and they're built for somebody having a device in their hand and be able to switch it off and switch it on again if they don't get service, or if the call doesn't go through first time, then they can press redial and redial the call. You can't do that with an IoT device. They're stuck in the middle of nowhere, quite often on battery, so they need to be able to have that guaranteed availability service. But conversely, the devices themselves also need to be designed for an IoT network, and not a network that's just they just think they can hammer away all the time. And I think what we need to be able to do is put in the hands of the developers the tools that enable them to develop the most appropriate product for their solution, rather than taking something off the shelf and hoping it works and plugging it together.
Is that about exposing the right things to developers, though? Because we tend to talk about, meet developers where they are, because embedded development is pretty difficult, right? Because you're dealing with the IT side of things, you're dealing with the connectivity element. Is it about kind of removing that connectivity element and them not having to worry about it when they're building their application?
No, it's actually the opposite. It's ensuring that the developers understand what their device is doing to a network, because bad device behavior on a network creates network issues for everybody. Most of all, the network of which these are hosted on. And of course, IoT devices spend a lot of time roaming, so they're visiting onto a network. So the more insight you can give to somebody that's developing a product as how their product behaves, the more efficient that can be on the network, the cheaper it can be for them to operate, and the more cost effective it can be in terms of battery life or other parameters.
I think maybe, I mean, developers is a term that we built a lot of our proposition around, but now we've thought about it a little bit more. It's not just developers, innovators in general, a network engineer or an IT department of an enterprise, they're used to managing their laptops, their devices, in terms of security, control, availability, monitoring what they aren't allowed to do. IoT, I mean, really now IoT feels to me is a bit of a tipping point where it's actually just a platform for digital transformation. And from an IT department's perspective, they should and are just as concerned about one of their assets, which is halfway up a lamppost, as a laptop which might be left on a train. They need to be able to control and observe what they're doing to meet the needs of their business and application. So that requires them to have a lot more access to sort of the innards of the mobile network, so they can just make better use of it and line it up with their needs.
Mick, can I bring you in? You've been sitting there patiently.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. I definitely agree that has been said. I think one part is definitely, let's say, giving more flexibility and management for the developers or the customers themselves. But vice versa, what Graham also mentioned is that actually it's also about kind of getting an insight into what my device is doing to the network, right? And how can I make sure that when I scale it up and then maybe it's going to the actual commercial use, it increases the data volumes as well, right? How does it then behave? How do I make sure that I'm not like randomly cut off from the network when providing critical service or anything like that, right? So it's I think it's a two-way street in a sense, that like how do we make sure that if we onboard more and more customers, that they are also aware of what they can do, cannot do on the network, right? And how do they kind of safeguard themselves from bad surprises?
Are they aware? Are the developers? I use the term again, but are they aware that? Okay, I think back to when the iPhone first came out, maybe not when it first came out, but subsequently, and there were all sorts of complaints about devices pinging networks and updates and causing all sorts of issues. And maybe Apple didn't care, and maybe and application developers on iPhones didn't maybe care too much if they were creating lots of data for their customers, or it was causing challenges for signaling traffic on the network. Do they care? Do they understand? Do they know?
I think that they have had no choice but to accept, the mobile networks as being quite opaque. Throw packets in, they throw packets out. They have no. It's been pretty much a dumb pipe. You put a SIM card in a device, it puts you on the internet, and that's what a lot of people think about when they think about IoT connectivity. But that's only sufficient up to a point. I think that. The fact that their internet is traversing the internet isn't always the best route to take, and it isn't necessarily. It opens up lots of security issues that they do care about. So if you've got an application that's running in AWS or Azure, other hyperscalers are available, and you've got devices, and you've got devices in the field communicating with them, then you do care that traffic and that data can get from your device into your back-end application. Historically, that's been something which is quite risky and complex to manage, just in terms of VPNs, encryption, security, bad actors. So if you say, right, by having your own slice of the mobile network, you can prescribe the route that traffic takes. You can keep it away from the internet. You can be very specific of what data can and can't be passed. They definitely care about that, because that's the sort of thing. Not caring about it is what keeps them up at night.
And
I would also say that. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Mick.
All right, thank you. I would also say that let's say from the short experience that OneOT has seen, then, you know, as the technology has evolved, then also the connectivity needs and also the customers, I don't know, knowledge or understanding the nuances of the cellular connectivity and network. Like if you think about like a simple plug and play solution about a smart meter or GPS tracker, then probably they don't really care that much about what is happening. But if you start talking about like more advanced teleoperated vehicles, drones, and those types of things, then those customers truly care and understand, and they really do ask those questions like, okay, what should I do? How should I approach this? Like, what can you help me make more visible and how to manage, right? So I think as the market has evolved and or maybe matured is the better word, then also the understanding and then the different types of customers, yes, you care. I think that would be my answer to Matt's question.
I think that they care even more when things go wrong. So when that's when that device doesn't attach as expected, or something does drop off of the network, and they have to raise a trouble ticket with the operator to arrange a trace, and they say, okay, we can do that next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, or they ask, is this device trying to attach to the network or not? Troubleshooting wise, the IoT innovators at the moment are quite reliant on the operators, and operators are busy. And operators can't necessarily jump and address those issues quickly enough to meet the needs of the end application. So I think that by opening all that up and putting all that troubleshooting in the hands of the innovators and the customers themselves, so they can give their customers a much better customer experience, that is really important, and they do care about that. They really care about the service they provide, especially when things don't go to plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say.
Sorry, go ahead, Nazia.
Just a quick note here from what both Mick and Mike had mentioned. I would add to this is like there are different levels of care depending who we're talking to. There is people who care internally within the organization and the operators. There's people that care internally within the enterprises, and then we also touched upon the developers. And each one of those personas, if you wish, have different kinds of care. So if we look, and Mike earlier mentioned about security, that's a big challenge within the IoT ecosystem. And the people who care, because everybody cares for what they touch, for what they control. The developers, they care about the device or the software that they're building. The network cares about the network agility and the network security and the network uptime and so on and so forth. And the enterprises, they care that their customer has a cohesive and a continuous user experience in the end of the day, that the services are up and running. So there are different levels of care within each segment that we are addressing, and it's quite a complex problem, I would say, a complex challenge of its own, because it touches different areas of the entire IoT ecosystem, because it's a very deep ecosystem that we're dealing with, and it addresses also different technologies, and different levels of awareness. Because in the end of the day, how can you care if you don't know what you need to care about?
Well, that's sort of the point, isn't it? I think people, we've become used to the mobile operators being so opaque, not really knowing what more is possible there. But when you're kicking off a new project, you care about how long it takes to get it live. You care about how easy the integration is. And so making sure that the network is exposed to developers in the way developers are used to working and they innovate with, you definitely care about that. If you reduce the time to launch a service from 3 months to 1 month, that's great. You've saved. And from the CFO will care about how much it costs, how much the data costs. And if you're putting a SIM card in a truck that's going to travel around Europe, you might want to pick out the cheapest network in each country and make sure your device prefers that to manage cost. But equally, if you've got a SIM card you could put in a fire alarm, you just want it to make sure it works, whatever network you're going to attach to. At the one day of the decade that it needs to do its job, it has to work. So one of the issues, this comes back to the one size fits all, there's different perspectives, financial, regulatory, technical, they've all got different considerations. And the only way to meet them all is put the control over their aspects in the hands of the customer.
Graham, I want to bring you in on this one. You, Velos, formerly JT, you you were a telco. Now,
We were.
now a slightly different beast, but were a telco. Were you opaque?
We tried not to be. I think we.
I'm being
we
a
sort
little
of-
bit naughty there, but I mean, getting the telco perspective on these things, I think is important, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm all for making as much available to our customers as possible, but network operators. I'm not going to pick on JT, but network operators are managing technology that has evolved over a number of iterations: 2G, 3G, 4G, now Cat-M1, now 5G, then 6G. So they have all this infrastructure that they have to be responsible for, and just making everything available it really isn't possible. You need to be able to almost start from scratch to give the customers the kind of insight that Mike's talking about.
I think
when we were with JT, we were very, very keen on, and that's how we built our IoT business, is exposing as much of the network elements to customers as we were able to, and in a controlled manner. But I think
on that one, Graham, I think that, I mean, I've worked in an operator as well, and seeing the challenges of meeting customers' expectations there, and a lot of it is down to the fact that traditional core network, you buy a core network from any of the big vendors, you take it out of its box, you put it in your rack, or you install it these days, and you get access to what it exposes to the rest of the world, or the facilities required to effectively run a consumer style service. There's standardized interfaces, for provisioning, creating APNs. There's a very tightly described set of things that you can do to those boxes. And if a customer asks to get more involved and to tweak and change something, the lid of those platforms is very tightly closed. So that's why in the industry there's those players who've tried to solve that by being very smart about a wraparound service around the core. We took a different view and thought, to really give visibility of everything, we've got to build the core from scratch, because from that first day of designing that architecture, you've got to be focused on the developer being the customer and an innovator being the customer, and that you don't know what they're going to need to be able to do in future 6 months from now. So I think it's very difficult for operators who have a standard core and who have engineers whose job it is to make sure that core is up 100% of the time, and if anyone goes near it to do anything crazy, you get your knuckles out with the ruler. So it is a challenge.
And if you think where network operators make their money, it's not IoT. It's not IoT roaming. It's gigabytes of data from handsets or whatever. So they have to have this balance between wanting to innovate but wanting to pay their bills and keep the lights on with the stuff that their home consumers.
And
sometimes
jumping on sometimes it's even worse than that. Sometimes they don't even have control over the network. I worked for a network operator that had outsourced its network to a big infrastructure vendor, and effectively they had to submit work jobs to be done anytime they wanted anything new added in, and you can bet that that's not going to be focused on IoT. To your point, but sorry, Mike, jump in.
I was just going to pick up on Graham's point there about operators being they don't make money out of IoT, and I think one of our arguments is the fact that that's largely because the network has been quite rigid and quite limited in its capabilities. So there are margin opportunities elsewhere in the value chain. People have built services to go on top of the mobile connectivity ecosystem to bring security, to bring visibility, observability, and integration. And customers do pay for that stuff, but operators aren't necessarily they've lost that revenue. It's moved elsewhere. And I actually think by the core network being smarter, the operators can recover some of that margin back. Because if they can provide connectivity, if they can provide security, if they can provide management, if they can provide facilities which demonstrate value to the customers, then they're very, very well placed to provide a very comprehensive service, because they've got deep access into the signaling and the levels of control much more than any over-the-top wraparound service would ever have.
Yeah, it's about native capabilities rather than trying to overlay it onto an untouchable monolith, right?
Mm. To that, I would also add that I think for more future on look of where we need to be with the network architecture per se of the operators, it will be key to look at being cloud native. It will be key to be more democratize the work that you might used earlier, and it will be extremely important to create programmable architecture, something that you can move from place to place, and not only but modularize in many ways, so you can use what you need when you need it. So the operators themselves, they have a long road ahead of them in order to take care of what a future network should look like. And that's not an easy task on its own, because we're looking about many years, or decades of infrastructure and legacy systems and silent and fragmented systems. So it's not an easy task for the operators. No matter how we look at it, it is a big challenge. And I don't think they lack the motivation, but it is a big challenge to undertake.
Absolutely. And 5G, though, does that... We actually had a question.
We lost Mike.
Associated with 5G, I seem to have disappeared, but maybe I'm having
back
again. I had a momentary flicker where I my heart was in my mouth and I thought I was off, but I'm back. 5G, the extent to which that might help with that kind of modularity and the additional functionality. Do you see that as having it being a substantial change?
I think it's. 5G is an interesting one, isn't it? Because there are two aspects to 5G. There's the aspect of performance, latency, the things that there's a lot of focus on, which is real. It is genuine. I think the number of use cases that are really revolutionized by that has maybe been overplayed a little bit. But the other side of 5G is the promise of integration, service exposure, and slicing, etc., which I think in reality is still quite a long way away from making a difference to actual customers. With the whole 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G progression, it feels to me a little bit like kids at Christmas. They rip their Christmas present open, they look in the box, and even before they properly start enjoying it, they're on to the next present. Yeah. And I think that there's lots of, what we're very careful to do at Security is make sure that all the features that we deliver, in terms of, partitioning, security, and so far, it is entirely G agnostic, because there's lots of really solid value to be derived still from 4G, for example. And it is possible if you're prepared to look at it in a different way. So I think the 5G standalone, obviously that's going to make a big difference when it properly gets its feet under the table. But 5G, I think at the moment, I don't believe is opening up that many new use cases.
And your timing was perfect there, Mike. I had a question pop up and somebody saying, are you talking about 5G standalone or non-standalone? So you tackled that within seconds of the question.
Right.
That's fantastic stuff. Slight change of topic. Okay, so I came to Graham about the network operators. Mick, I want to ask you about resellers. What's the resellers' perspective? I'm pretty sure you've got some interesting views, and particularly in the context of what the telcos are providing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that obviously what we're looking for is, high quality service, right? So that's priority number one. But overall, I think what Mike brought out previously as well, that what we have also tried to do is kind of build these wraparound services on top of what we are receiving from our network operators or telecom partners. And then, each has their own capabilities and then what they can expose to us in a sense. So we have had to build a lot of workarounds on top in order to unify, let's say, the service that we are providing to our customers, right? They don't really care if it's Telecom A or Telecom B or Telecom C on the background, right? So at the end of the day, they want the same service, right? So we have had to kind of find our way or wiggle through different legacy infrastructures and other bits in order to unify the service for our customers. And then yeah, obviously what we have talking about is like more programmability, modularity. Those would be key, right? So that we can also be kind of have a chance to see where the traffic is going through, what packet gateways, those types of things, easily change the VPNs, APNs, and etc. Right? So that would be an ideal scenario, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Although
And
that does raise a question for me. Sorry, Nasi, you might be about to talk about this. So it raises a question for me about whether those kind of features and functionality are exactly what the customers are looking at, or whether what they want is just somebody to help them out, right? Do they care about all of these? I mean, I know you do, Mick, as a connectivity provider, but the technology adopters, they just want someone to hold their hand as they deploy this stuff.
Yeah, I think it depends. Sorry,
no, go ahead.
Maybe quickly is that as we discussed previously, different use cases, different needs, right? So there are definitely those types of use cases where, let's say, you're providing an end-to-end, fully managed service in a sense, right? But at the same time, there are definitely niche use cases that would like to have this access to themselves, right? So even we would be exposing those options to them.
Mm-hmm. I would add to this that if we're looking at resellers or we're looking at the customers, the enterprises themselves, what they really need or they're looking for is for somebody to remove the complexity, right, around or the wraparound that Mick spoke. They created a wraparound in order to provide complete services on top of what the operators have been given, which is necessary because the customers themselves, they're looking for somebody to solve a problem in the end of the day. And that problem can be solved with a device. It can be solved with connectivity on top of the device. Then you need to add, some analytics so they can see what is happening on the performance. So the customer is looking for somebody to hold their hand and guide them through because they don't have the know-how, or rather, and they don't want to acquire that know-how because they want to concentrate on what they do best. Serving their customer. So they're looking for partners within the ecosystem, be it a network operator, be it a reseller or an integrator, to say, okay, help me put it all together. What I do need is that my customer's experience in the end of the day is good, so I don't lose the customer. But then if we can look at the IoT ecosystem itself, it is complex, as I mentioned earlier, and there's quite a few things that are important to the customers in the end of the day, and that touches on what Mick said, and that's the security, it's the performance. We're looking at scalability there. We're looking at the flexibility to be able to increase your capacity as and when you need. And then you need to understand what's going on. So you need controls, you need dashboards to see, all right, all the data that is coming through, what is happening to my to my solution, to my service that I'm offering to the customer, right? And I haven't even touched on the compliance and regulations, which is very, very, very complex. So it is a lot of things that the customers, they need, and it doesn't matter if it's an enterprise or a reseller or an integrator. Some of them have more knowledge in the end of the day, right? For instance, integrators and resellers, they understand what is happening around IoT more than probably an enterprise customer does, but they have overall the same needs.
Well, it snowballs quite quickly, though, doesn't it? Because you're right, Nasir, in that customers, a customer has a particular requirement. I want to connect that scooter to that back-end server. Mm-hmm. That's where it starts. But then as you get into it, snowballs when you start thinking about security and control of costs and routing and any regulatory things. And there's a lot of stuff which ends up being wrapped around. It turns out a really simple idea into a really, really complicated project. Mm-hmm. And the very fragmented value chain has just made that worse, because you almost end up having to deal and having to broker between different parties providing different parts of the solution, where what you really just want is those packets can get to there safely and always.
Mm.
So we have to try, I think, a bit more vertical integration in the supply chain, so all that can be done in one central place. Makes all that easier.
I would
And I
add to
think
this also accountability and ownership. Who owns, the different areas? You very well said, Mike, the fragmentation, and it's immense of how fragmented the industry is, right? But who owns the responsibility in the end of the day to provide the services that the customer needs?
Mm.
It's a moot point. Graham, I know you wanted to jump in on
yeah,
this one.
I
Question for
think
you as well after.
the obvious impact there is about the longer term customer support and the service that the customer's customer gets. We're sort of focusing quite a lot on the development and what have you, but fundamentally you can develop the service, but if you can't then manage it when it's out in the field and you can't control it properly, as Mike was saying, then it doesn't become, it becomes a paperweight, not an IoT device. And so you really need to be able to dive into that device in the wild and make sure that it can be maintained, it can be controlled, it can be updated or what have you.
I mean, those devices are often quite constrained as well, which makes the project even more challenging. These aren't computers, as in laptops and devices. They're often sensitive with a long battery life. Requirements about things you need to do to secure it in terms of, encryption and so on and so forth. That's another level of complexity around all those others. So that's why we believe bringing some of that back into the network relieves some of those responsibilities from the device.
And getting those things up right up front can add years to an IoT device's life as well.
Mm.
So if you can add 25% battery life by only pinging the network once an hour instead of once a minute, then you've won. You've really added value there.
We talk about something called cross optimization. So rather than just picking any connectivity technology, sticking a device on any network and try and build your application in any way you fancy, optimizing those different elements with each other is increasingly critical. Now, Graham, I did want to come to you on a question that's sort of related. What we're tending to find with network operators or connectivity providers is that they're spending a bit more time on that cross optimization piece, that enhanced pre-sales, post-sales, almost consultative selling type approach, rather than just lobbing some connectivity over the fence at the customers. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think the operators, the providers of connectivity are going to win are those that expose as much of their APIs or whatever you want to call them as early as possible to the customer. So they make it as frictionless as possible to get hold of the device, to get hold of the SIMs to install them, and then make it as easy as possible to use those SIMs without having to refer to manuals, refer to people, get hold of the supplier. So the fundamentally, the easier it is for somebody to buy, the more they'll buy from you.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm going to go to that's a nice neat break point at which we can go to some of the questions that have come in from the audience. I'm going to go to one of the ones that came in advance of the session. I quite like this one. How's AI and machine learning changing or assisting in IoT deployments as it relates to connectivity or value-added services like security? There was always going to be an AI question, right? Who wants to have a go at the AI question?
Well, there's a couple of different aspects, isn't there, where intersection between the IoT and AI comes together. At the end of the day, a traditional AI type application involves a load of data which you train a model on and then you query to get insights from. And a lot of the high-profile applications out there at the moment, that body of information is out there on the internet somewhere. But there's nothing on the planet generating more data than IoT. And so, being able to train models based on, sensor readings, mobility of devices, live information to keep an AI model up to date, so you can query it about and make real live point in time decisions is a great application. AI to me feels a bit like computing in the 70s, or someone else talked about sending you mentioned Matt, about sending a job to the engineering department is very batch based. Take a load of data, process it, ask it questions, and I think IoT has the ability to make that much more continuous, like a streaming AI type approach. So I think that's in terms of the actual payload, but I also think in terms of device behavior and optimizing device behavior and cost and etc., the sheer volume of devices that are being deployed means it's impossible to do that as a human or even by setting rules. So if you like AI around the metadata of the network, which spots security anomalies and optimizes performance by learning for itself, is a really exciting opportunity too.
Yeah, completely. Other thoughts on AI?
I would
Yeah, I
sum-
agree with. So,
Go
I
ahead,
agree
Nick.
with what Mike brought out, and this is something that we have also looked into at OneOT. Is mostly like how can we help our customers to manage larger fleets of devices, right? So as Mike said, like the number of devices is growing so large that one human being or two cannot really keep up with it, and they don't need to refresh the page to see how many data sessions there has been or how big of a data session it was and stuff like that, right? So you can leverage the AI to bring out those anomalies that are happening with the devices and kind of start reacting quicker if some weird things are happening, right? And then same applies for data cost optimizations and other things, right? So I think there's a lot of, let's say, use cases also how to optimize the whole operations of hundreds of thousands of IoT devices.
Yeah, I would summarize what both Mike and Mick mentioned into AI or machine learning can give us greater automation, optimization, and intelligence through the analytics, so we can spot things as they happen, when they happen, proactively. And also, if we look at what is on the data reactively, you can pick the anomalies a lot easier with the help of AI and machine learning. But in the end of the day, I think it's AI has become, especially in the past 18 months, a little bit of a buzzword. And we need to think that AI is they're algorithms, right? And we've been dealing with algorithms every single time we're building any software. So they're more advanced algorithms and they're looking at data slightly different. By the end of the day, they're algorithms. So what I would say and what I normally say to my customers is, well, if you think of implementing AI, think about the need and the use case. Make mention use cases. Do you really need to spend the money, because in implementing AI is quite expensive? Do you need it, or can you solve the same challenge with a more basic algorithm?
Okay. Another question from this time, live one from the audience. Bit of a contentious one, maybe, given the who's on the session. How do you evolve from a classical core, Ericsson, Nokia, etc., to a more agile and flexible core? And is it possible without the help of these big suppliers? Mike.
Yeah, I thought that one might come my way. I think that the approach that we've proposed to get the best traction with is this concept of an adjacent core. Effectively, lots of these segments are new or IoT applications which are new customers with new requirements. So it's reasonably easy from a technical perspective to effectively divide up your IMSI range and say half of it goes to your traditional core, half goes to a centralized, a specific core for these applications. So that, from our perspective, that core can also be connect to multiple operators. So essentially be operator agnostic, and it almost becomes like a parallel software-defined mobile ecosystem which is a platform rather than as a service. So it it doesn't require to use that adjacent core approach. You don't need to do a complex integration project with your existing, Huawei HSS or Nokia P gateway. This sits entirely alongside that and doesn't disrupt that stuff at all.
Okay. Any other contributions on that one?
Yeah, I mean, we're busy building a second core at the moment. We're obviously very close to JT, but we're taking another core from another provider. And the work quite happily coexist with each other. But you kind of need to do that when we're not going. So the point is, we're not going to one of the big boys. We're going to a much more smaller, agile provider, but is being far more responsive than we found from some of the larger providers. So
because
you don't have to go and spend millions and millions and millions and millions on a core.
A traditional core is very well structured with its support surrounding OSS and BSS, so that a consumer can walk into your shop, buy a SIM card, top it up, access the internet so they can watch YouTube. It's designed for that. And that's a very valid set of requirements for those segments. But I don't think there's any issue at all having other cores for other purposes.
There seems to be a different sort of opinion in connectivity providers. Some see it as being absolutely critical to have a separate cloud native core for IoT, and others are happy with it sitting on existing core networks. How do you see the different approaches that the various players are taking? I mean, is it just a case that the ones that aren't adopting a separate IoT core have not thought it through, or is it that there are different approaches that will be more appropriate to different players?
My opinion on that is that if you buy a traditional core, you're going to be providing a traditional service effectively, and for lots of suppliers that's fine. What they want to do is they want to scale. They want to. It's about leveraging their coverage, leveraging their pricing, leveraging their footprint, and they're not really yet that interested in the software-defined aspects that you'll get out of a more specialist core. This idea of democratizing control and providing a more cloud-style service to customers. Some, particularly the bigger operators, aren't there yet. It's too big a project for them to contemplate. So they're happy with the approach they've taken. But our view is the tide will turn on that.
Okay. Any other views on that one?
I think if you can, I think having it doesn't need to be a cloud-based core versus a standard core. You can have a standard core as well, but as long as it's built and flexible, and you can have all the relevant value adds and build value-added services on top of that core, then probably having two cores is the way forward if you're an MNO.
Yeah, I think from our experience working with different network operators, is that it depends on where they are in their journey and what's the priority, right? So if they are if they have agreed that they are really doubling down on IoT, then yes, usually there's a separate core that they're also running only for their IoT business, right? But there are also maybe who are at the very beginning of their journey, in the sense that they have first focus on the, let's say, commercials and the sales, then they haven't yet made the step to have a separate core, right? So I think it's case by case, and then also where the network operator is with their IoT journey.
Yeah, fair enough. Graham, you mentioned something about value-added services, and actually, I had that on my list of things to raise as a topic. By having this greater control on the network, what are the value-added services you can layer on for the customer proposition? And I'm also interested, because people ask me a lot, which ones are the customers going to be willing to pay for?
I don't know if I had that. If I had that, we'd be developing them and charging for them, right? I think a much better view of signaling type traffic, so of signaling information, so customers can see exactly what's happening to their device, how it's behaving on the network, and that's useful for both the operator or the reseller and the end user. I think agility. I think being able to define, to be able to build stuff quickly, try it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, then move away. I think security, obviously, we've already sort of almost done that to death, but security is increasingly important. All the larger companies, it's absolutely essential that they have. I think, again, it sort of depends on who the customer is and how they view their security and what they think about. But those ones that have thought the issue through, like as Mike uses the example of the laptop and a device on a post, they have to be treated the same within an IT environment. And I think reach. I think that's absolutely fundamental. You know, we live in a global world, and customers. One of the first questions we ever get asked are, "What is the reach? How many networks have you got? Where are those networks? And the reason networks and reach are important is it's about resilience. It's about, can you give me all 4 networks in country X? Because everybody realizes no one network is going to be enough. So I think it's quite fundamental at that level and builds on top. There's value add to build on top.
I would add a couple more things to what Graham said there in terms of like what services can we overlay on top in order to make money? Because in the end of the question that you mentioned, Matt, is like, how can you make money? And absolutely spot on of what Graham said. I would add integration services on the top of it, because integrating the different devices, integrating even the devices to the software and so on and so forth is quite complicated. So having a service on top for integration is key, is important, and you can charge quite a bit of money. And customers will accept it because they're used to paying for integration services. And, a subject which is managed services overall, because we talked quite a bit earlier on of who's responsible, who cares, and who has the knowledge by providing these managed services. So somebody who can come in and say, okay, I will hold your hand and I will walk you through your entire setup. End to end, and provide you solutions. I will provide you the partner ecosystem, and I will provide you the processes and so on and so forth. You can sell that as a service on top of connectivity and everything else, and customers will happily pay for it.
Yeah, it brings us back to that topic of holding the hand of the customer, adding the sort of pre-sales, post-sales layer onto things, which actually brings me onto a topic that I want to make sure that we don't miss. You know who's really bad at doing that stuff? Hyperscale cloud providers. However, hyperscale cloud providers are also incredibly successful. What can telco learn from the hyperscalers? Mike, I'm going to come to you on that one.
Yeah, I love this one. This is definitely a subject close to my heart, because I know, as a techie, we're used to, you say this all the time, but 2:30 in the morning, halfway through our pizza, wanting to spin up some infrastructure in AWS. We need 4 servers, or we need this network, and we log on, a few clicks, and that the infrastructure is running. We're paying for it on a consumption-based model, and let's not forget the cloud hyperscalers are very good at charging us, finding things to charge for us. They make plenty of money there. So, and as a developer, I'm happy to pay for that because I use as much as I need and no more for as long as I need and no more. And so, if you're building an IoT application, you do that on day 1. Then day 2, you need to connect that to the rest of the world. You turn to your mobile operator, and it's entirely different experience, like we've been talking about earlier. It's it's not a click, it's a project. It's not a consumption, it's a charge. It's documentation, risk management, deployment plans, robot plans. It's a big complicated endeavor. So I think that if you could control and manage your slice of the world's mobile connectivity network in the same way as you can control your infrastructure in AWS, then the two things would be a sort of match made in heaven. Really, it would fit together really well. But the thing that they need to learn there is comes back to democratization again. AWS, Azure, Google, those platforms are democratized. Anybody can do anything at any time, at any scale. That's what
self-service.
Yeah, self-service. Whether you've got 5 SIMs or 500,000 SIMs, you should be able to get this the same control on the same basis.
And is the challenge there just the immaturity of effectively the front end onto it, the digital channels? You might think of it that way, that aren't really established but just need to be slapped onto an existing set of middleware, or is there a more fundamental challenge with making that pivot to be a bit more like a hyperscaler?
I think the roots need to be deeper. I think trying to just put an orchestration layer on top of a traditional core, that's what makes that difficult. So I do think that it needs a different architecture, because at scale, many large organizations, they're going to be automating this on their side. They'll be using a Terraform or something. They click a button, it spins up servers. That same click should also spin up the infrastructure they need on the mobile side. So it's not necessarily around a digital channel and portal. It's about giving proper, secure control to configure the network on demand at any time through APIs or similar.
I will also add to this the software side that we cannot forget, because Mike covered the technical side of this quite well, but the softer side, the human element, it also requires a fundamental mind shift of how we operate and work in order to act more like hyperscalers. And historically, it's the more traditional approach is well ingrained for the people that work within the operator environment. So it's also a mind shift that needs to happen in order to take advantage of that.
Excellent. Any other comments? Okay, I did promise we'd get to regulation. Now, regulation does seem to be one of the challenging things for anybody deploying global connectivity, and it's getting more complex, more data sovereignty issues, more kind of polarization of geographically as a result of some of the regulation that's coming out in various regions. So what can the network do to help with overcoming some of those challenges?
I think there's two particular aspects on the regulation side, because the data sovereignty is important, not just where the data is at rest, but also the route that the data takes. If you're in a country in Latin America and you want to deploy POS terminals, you want to make sure that the payload data from that terminal to your server stays in country. In order for that to be realistic, you have to have control. You have to be able to, when you're setting up your service through the portal, define those policies so the data isn't just routed back and forth to Europe, as would be normally the case. So that's important. But I also think that there's a middle ground to be found, and it's a bit of a pendulum, really, the regulatory piece. Because if you think about a device with a SIM card in it, why should that really be handled any differently from that device being connected to a Wi-Fi network? It's just data, and I think that lots of the regulation in our sector has come out of a process which was driven by voice and SMS, where there's historically been lots of regulatory constraints, and the industry's or the regulators have tried to find a way to apply that to data as well. But at some point, that there has to be a more pragmatic line drawn there, because there's so many different ways to connect to the internet. Most of them aren't regulated, so why should in fact, you've got a SIM card in there, why should that make any difference?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that's not the reality, but that's sort of my religious view on it.
Yeah, and there's some interesting offerings from a few players coming out that are effectively promising to manage cellular-based IoT connectivity in the same way that you manage Wi-Fi, local area network, and that's, I think, the kind of language that people want to hear, right? But easier said than done, I think. Any other thoughts? Any other perspectives on regulation?
It's a big topic. I was just going to say it's a big topic when it comes to regulation, right? Especially around data sovereignty, because security and identity, it is a big topic, and who owns that data in the end of the day, and how easy can we make for the customers to understand what data we hold, where we hold it, can they extract it or delete it, and who's going to do all that. So make it very easy for the customer, irrespective if it's a network operator or a reseller or an integrator. Make it very easy, step by step, of what is happening. The process needs to be there, so it's plug and play and easy to understand.
Fantastic. At that point, we're at time. I would like to thank you all. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nasia. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Mick.
Thank you.
For fascinating discussion. Thank you to everybody for your questions online and ahead of the webinar. We will circulate those amongst the speakers and should be able to get back to you with responses where appropriate. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll call the webinar to a close. Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.